Hey friends, we're going to read Guest Chapter 8, my 5th grade friends, and Rudy is going to sleep while I read. Chapter 8 of Guest by Mary Downing Hahn. At first, the dark lands seemed no different from Mirkwood, but as Guest and I walked further, a mist like a fallen cloud settled over us. Moisture clung in drops to trees and ferns. Color faded into shades of gray, dull and dreary. It was as if something dark ran under the surface of this land and leaked into the light. I couldn't see it or taste it or touch it, but I felt it. The close, damp air made me weary. My feet grew so heavy I could barely lift one and put it in front of the other. Guest lagged behind, whimpering to himself. Too tired to walk farther, I sat down and rested my back against a boulder. Guest squatted beside me. Without saying a word, he picked up a stick and drew squiggly shapes in the dirt. "Do you remember anything about the dark lands?" I asked. The Guest didn't answer. He'd found a beetle and was trying to make it climb up his stick. I didn't think he'd even heard me. I nudged his hand and he dropped the stick. "Don't scare Bug, Molly." "I asked you what you remember about this place. Is it always gray and damp? Do fierce animals live here? Will they hurt us?" Guest watched the beetle crawl over his toes. "Music. I remember music. Sad music. Pretty music. They danced." "Did they teach you the song you sing?" Guest wrinkled his forehead in thought. "Ma'am sing that song." "My ma'am?" "My ma'am. Not to me, but I listens." He picked up the beetle and cupped it gently in his hands. "My ma'am not like me. Scream, hit, hurt me." Raising his head, he looked at me. "Molly's ma'am feed me, but doesn't like me. You doesn't like me." For a moment he looked sad, but then he smiled at the beetle perched on his thumb. "Bugs like me. My dog like me." I looked at Guest, really looked at him. Something I hadn't ever done. He was still an ugly little thing, no argument there. His skin was pale, his mouth wide and thin-lipped, his teeth small and crooked as a roll of pebbles. Flyaway yellow hair hung in his eyes and straggled down his neck. But the biggest change was his size. Surely he'd grown faster than a human baby. He was still scrawny and bow-legged, but he was already the size of a 5-year-old. He'd stopped hitting and biting. He ate regular food, he trudged along on his 2 feet, and he seemed to talk better every day. I watched him play with the beetle. How gentle he was. A village boy would most likely torment a beetle. He'd pull off its wings and legs, maybe even step on it and laugh. I'd seen them do it just to make girls scream. But not Guest. He looked at me, as if he sensed I was watching him. I pointed at the beetle. "Your bug is sitting on your nose now. Doesn't that tickle?" Guest looked cross-eyed at the beetle. He laughed and moved the little creature to a patch of moss. We watched it crawl into the ferns. "Bug, go home," he said. "We go home?" "When we find Thomas." I stood up and shouldered my pack. As dusk darkened into night, we made beds for ourselves in a tree's cradle of roots. Guest gathered wood, and I used my flint to light a fire. By the time we'd eaten our meal of cheese, bread, and an apple each, it was full night. In the dark lands, that meant black in a way night never was in Lower Hexham. The ever-present mist hid the stars and the moon, and the trees wove themselves together, trunk and limb, into a black wall. "Look there," Guest pointed. "Something coming." "Lights," I whispered. "Dozens of them." "What is it?" Guest pulled me down beside him. "Hide." "But I want to see." I stood up. The lights twinkled like fireflies, but as they came closer, they were more like tiny lanterns, dancing back and forth, swinging this way and that, now lighting the ground, now lighting the trees, with a strange greenish glow. "Look, Guest. Aren't they beautiful?" Guest tugged me so hard I toppled down beside him. "Do what my dog said. Listen, Molly. They come for you." Even though I longed to stand up and watch them, I crouched beside him. The lights looked harmless enough, but I'd promised Madog I'd listen to Guest. As the lights came closer, I saw the creatures holding the lanterns. They weren't as pretty as I expected them to be. Wearing tattered leaves and cobwebs, they were wrinkled like old men and women. The air around them echoed with their cries, a high-pitched whine that buzzed in my head and made it impossible to think. "Molly, Molly," they cried, "come with us. We have a surprise for you, something you long for, something dear to you, your heart's desire. Come, come." Guest grabbed my hand and held tight. "Tricks and lies. No listen. Cover ears." I tried to pull away, crazy now to follow them, sure they'd lead me to Thomas. But Guest had grown stronger. I could not break his grip on me. All at once they surrounded us, hundreds of them, no bigger than wasps. They dazzled our eyes with their lanterns and deafened us with their cries. No longer pretending to be friendly, they pinched and they bit. They pulled our hair as if they meant to yank it out. They tore our clothes as if they wished to strip us to our bare skin. We swatted them, but they swarmed around us like midges. We could do nothing to drive them away or to protect ourselves. "Lock it!" Guest screamed. In desperation, I yanked the chain from my dress and thrust it into their midst. At its touch, the creature shrieked in pain and spiraled upward. In seconds, they'd vanished into the darkness of the trees. "Tinies. Kind folks send them," Guest said. "They lead you into swamps and drowns you." I've never seen them before, but Dado has. He calls them will-o'-the-wisps or hinky-punks. Good, you listened to me this time. I should have thanked him, but I didn't want him to think too much of himself. He was right this time, but maybe not always. In the morning, I filled the water jug from a stream, and we trudged deeper into the gloomy forest. A crow watched us from a high branch, and then flew away silently. I saw him vanish into the gloom, and likely on his way to tell the kind folk where we were. Guest plodded beside me, his skinny arms swinging by his side, his head down, his ears red from the Tiny's bites. "How much farther is it?" I asked. "Far," he said. "Or not far. You sound like my dog." "My dog knows more than me, much more than you." "That's because you're a changeling, and I'm not." We walked on through the endless, dim forest. Tree roots humped and twisted across the path, reaching out like long arms and fingers to trip us. Mist clung to our skin and hair, soaking our clothing and all our belongings. It was a wonder Guest and I weren't covered with moss like the trees and the rocks. No matter how many miles we traveled, we saw no sign of the kind folk. Sometimes we heard distant laughter, sometimes music, but we couldn't tell where it came from. The wind blew oddly, now this way, now that, and the leaves slithered overhead like snakes. Exhausted, I leaned on a stout stick I'd found along the way. My boots pinched my toes and blistered my heels. My pack chafed my shoulders and weighed too much for the little it held. Pulling out the water jug, I drank and handed it to Guest. "Not too much," I warned. "We haven't crossed a stream for miles." Guest gulped and passed the jug back to me. His ears twitched like rabbits. "Listen, something's making noise." Guest had no sooner warned me than I heard a loud rustling in the ferns. They swayed as if the wind were blowing, and out stepped a person I never expected to see in the Darklands. "Well, well," Granny Hedgepath said. "Whom do I see but Molly Cloverall from Lower Hexham?" I stared at her, speechless with surprise. She laughed and came close enough for me to smell her familiar odor of smoke and damp earth and herbs. "What's wrong, girl? Cat got your tongue?" Granny," I stammered. What are you doing here?" For the first time ever, I was glad to see her. "Why, you never know where I'll turn up," she said. "I'm a wanderer, I am. I go here and there and everywhere." Guest squeezed my hand as if he was scared. "You remember Granny," I said to him. "She lives on the other side of Cattail Hill, not far from Mam and Dado." He said nothing, but his face screwed up like he smelled something bad. Ducking behind my skirt, he peered at her. Granny had that effect on people. I thought, scaring them with her strange ways and words, but meeting her here in the Darklands seemed good luck. Perhaps she'd seen something that would help us. "You done what you said you'd do," Granny said. "I thought it were a foolish boast from a foolish girl, but here you be, far from home, and it's still with you. I've not found the kind folk yet. Do you know where they hide themselves?" "Huh, indeed I do. They've been helping me find my roots and berries." She held up the basket she carried, and I saw a heap of dead plants. Her wrinkled face split into a grin. Come with me, the two of you, and I'll take you to them. Did you see Thomas? Is he well? Oh, he's very well indeed. Those ones take good care of him. Yes, they do. And I've taken good care of Guest. See how he's grown? He walks and talks now. Oh, yes, she cut in. But he's what he is, ain't he? And always will be. She spat on the ground almost at Guest's feet. You done wasted your time dragging him along with you. They got no use for his kind. I held Guest's hand tighter. Will the kind folk give me back Thomas? Well, you just come along with me, Molly. I'll take you straight to the Queen herself, and she'll give you Thomas. Yes, indeed, she will. Oh, yes, indeed. Granny laughed and clapped her hands. Guest whimpered and tugged at my skirt. Embarrassed, I swatted his hands away. Don't be rude, Guest. Say hello to Granny. Show her how much you've learned. Guest hid his face in my skirt and said not a word. Granny laughed. He ain't no different, just bigger. She reached for my hand. Come along with me if you want to see Thomas. I ain't got all day. Guest tried to pull me away from Granny. I bent to look at his face. What is wrong with you? He shook his head and pointed at Granny. The old woman laughed again. He don't like me, do he? He's just tired as I am. We've come so far. That you have, but come along with me. Soon you'll have your Thomas and be rid of that one and be on your way home. With Guest trying to hold me back, I trudged into the ferns after Granny. How is Ma'am? I asked her. And Daddo, did he come back? Do they miss me? Are they worried? Hush, child. Everyone is fine. Your father's home and your mother's a-bloomin' with health. Happy they are that the changeling is gone, but sad to lose both their children. I took Guest's hand and tried to tow him after me, but he dug his heels in the earth and refused to move. It's all right, I whispered to him. She's taking us to the kind folk. Be nice, Guest. Granny smiled at me. I'd never noticed what a foxy grin she had. Perhaps I'd not seen a smile on her grumpy face before now. Thomas will be right happy to see you, Molly. That he will. And the kind folk, too. Such a brave girl to come all this way. Yes, indeed. They got a grand feast all ready for you. It was odd, but the more Granny talked, the less I understood. Her words had become a stream of water running over smooth stones, soothing but senseless. After what seemed miles, we came to a hollow in the ferns. Granny's endless talking had made me dizzy. I swayed on my feet, feeling as if I could barely stand. Oh, dear me, Molly, look at you, about to topple over. Granny helped me sit down in the ferns. Best you right here. I'll go fetch Thomas. Before she left, she took a pretty little blue bottle out of her basket. This is my elixir of health, she said. Drink it, and you'll soon feel fit to greet Thomas. I took the bottle eagerly, thirstier than I'd ever been in my life. Thank you, I whispered. I'll be back in a trice. With a laugh, Granny disappeared into the ferns. I pulled out the stopper and lifted the bottle to my lips, but before I took one sip, Guest leaped out of the ferns and knocked the bottle out of my hand. Its contents poured onto the ground. Although Guest tried to shoo it away, a butterfly dipped down to drink from the puddle of elixir. In a moment, it lay still, and the ferns around it withered. I stared at the dead butterfly, my head spinning with thirst. Surely Granny never meant to poison me. The kind folk must have tricked her. Guest shook his head. She not Granny. Kind folk magic. Why didn't you tell me? He pointed to his mouth. Granny taken my words. I pulled you. I tugged. I made faces, but... I bowed my head and started to cry. Oh, Guest, I believed her. I thought she'd bring Thomas. I was sure she would. He began pulling and tugging at me again. Not safe here. We go back to path. Staggering to my feet, I ran with Guest, but the path wasn't where we thought it should be. In growing fear, we pushed through tall grasses and stumbled into bogs, sinking ankle deep, sometimes knee deep, before we pulled our feet free. We made our way through clumps of heather that clung to our ankles and tripped us. I lost my walking stick and almost left a boot in a bog. Strange voices called our names. Muffled by dense gray air, they seemed to surround us, but we couldn't tell where they came from or how close they were. Midges with bites as sharp as the tiniest teeth swarmed around us. Just when I thought I couldn't take another step, Guest cried out, "Molly, the path, the path! I see it!" I stumbled out of the woods behind Guest. The white stones bordering the path glowed softly in the dusk. The voices calling us faded into the distance, and for now, at least, we were safe. That, my friends, is the end of chapter 8. And Rudy continues to sleep. So very soon, you will be seeing or hearing chapter 9 from me. Again, Rudy and I miss you guys terribly. I'd like to introduce you to another friend of ours. This is our cat, Sass. This is our sassy cat. Yes, he's been making me pet him the whole time I've been reading. So I hope you guys enjoyed chapter 8. Look forward to chapter 9. We miss you guys, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.